She was my professor's daughter, but I fell in love. My professor's daughter. Chapter 1, Orientation. The autumn quarter arrived with a damp, cedar-scented promise that only the Pacific Northwest can keep. I was 24, knee-deep in a graduate program that measured time in monographs and museum labels, convinced beauty belonged to canvases and carved stone, not to actual, unpredictable people. Professor Evelyn Vale, our Renaissance scholar czar, could make a room of groggy TAs sit up like they'd been plugged into the mains. Persuasive, particular, terrifying. I admired her from the safe distance of footnotes. The department mixer was all hummus trays and cautious small talk, the kind of evening where people said, fascinating, like an apology. I was contemplating escape when the door opened and the air recalibrated. She stepped in wearing a navy dress that didn't announce itself, but everything else did: open posture, wind-tossed dark hair, the alert gaze of someone who knows a language you want to learn. "Mira," Professor Vale said, materializing beside me. "This is my daughter, Alessia. She's in town for a week." Alessia. The name hit like the first measure of a piece I'd loved forever without knowing. She offered her hand, I offered mine. Electricity did whatever electricity does when it forgets its manners. Her smile was warm, wry, and a little tired, as if airports had tried their best to ruin her day and failed. "Mom said you're writing on the countergaze in late Baroque portraiture," she said, voice textured by travel and cello rosin. "I want to hear everything. People use, I want to hear everything, the way they use, tell me about yourself, on forms." Alessia meant it. 20 minutes telescoped to 3. She played principal cello with a chamber ensemble in San Francisco, wrote half-finished pieces on napkins, collected second-hand metronomes because broken timekeepers are optimistic. "Alessia," Professor Vale called, summoning her to greet donors. Alessia's hand lingered half a heartbeat in mine before she went. I watched her join the fundraiser knot, felt ridiculous, and then felt more ridiculous later, lying in my studio with the rain talking to the window and a name echoing through my chest like a plucked string. I told myself it was nothing. A nice conversation, a good face, a long week. I have always been an accomplished liar when the audience is me. Chapter 2, Fault Line. By morning the campus smelled like wet leaves and espresso. Chiaroscuro on Caravaggio's Magdalene should have held me, but all my notes slanted toward a margin where I'd written Alessia in block letters like a curse or a blessing. At break, Professor Vale mentioned, casually, as if it wasn't a grenade, that her daughter would join Friday's Visiting Artist series. "She's curious about our conservation lab," she added, pride sneaking through her faculty cadence. 3 days. I told myself I could pull focus, behave, be normal. I spent those days washing dishes I didn't own and rearranging books by the color of their spines. Friday came fog-wrapped. I changed outfits twice, landed on a forest sweater I pretended wasn't strategic. Alessia had saved the seat beside her. "I was hoping you'd come," she whispered, and that was the moment I stopped pretending the ground wasn't moving. The lecture, on gold leaf repair and humidity, passed like an underwater dream. I absorbed none of it, just the scent at her wrist, jasmine, cedar, the way she leaned forward at every question, how our knees discovered orbit. Afterward she said, "There's a place with good dumplings and terrible lighting. Come with me?" I did. We traded biographies over steam and chili oil. She'd left a prestigious orchestra for a scrappier ensemble that let her compose. I confessed my thesis had started with grief I hadn't known where to put and found a museum held the right kind of silence. When we split at the crosswalk, she toward her mother's townhouse, me toward my righteous solitude, she touched my sleeve and didn't say what we were both thinking. I walked home backwards in my head, replaying the angle of her mouth when she listened, the way her laugh arrived whole. No one tells you that recognition is loud. Chapter 3, Cello Room. Monday, the practice room hallway lured me like a myth. "I'll just walk past," I promised no one. The sound found me first, low, burnished, a line that understood loss and refused to sink. Through the window, Alessia, breath synced with bow, body and instrument negotiating. She looked up mid-phrase, saw me, didn't stop. The music shifted, less rehearsal, more telling. When she finished, she opened the door. The air smelled like pine resin. New piece, she said, easing the end pin back. It's misbehaving. It sounds like a storm that changed its mind, I said, and she smiled like she'd take the line home and keep it. We stood close enough to measure courage. I'm here 5 more days, she said. We could spend them. No promises. Just time. Your mother is my advisor, I said, the last fence post between sense and falling. She is my mother, Alessia said gently. Not my keeper. And you're not a minor character in her life. We didn't kiss. Instead we walked the arboretum until the light went copper and told each other the kind of truths you only tell when you intend to leave intact. On the bus back, our shoulders found each other. Distance measured itself in inches and arguments. Chapter 4, Baroque Light. The chapel concert was populated by the university's entire supply of cardigans. We sat in the 8th pew, shoulder to shoulder. During Bach's third suite, her little finger found mine and stayed. After, under a streetlight collecting moths, she said, I can't pretend I don't want to kiss you whenever I see you. I have a 4-chapter plan about why we shouldn't, I said, helpless. Great, she said. I'm terrible at plans. Maybe that's why I'm here. We didn't kiss. We built a mylar-thin bubble and then tried to breathe inside it. The next day she texted a photo of a de Kooning study at the University Museum, paint drunk on its own movement. Thinking about attention, she wrote. Attention is a kind of love, I typed, then deleted, then sent anyway. Chapter 5, Kitchen Table. Office hours with Professor Vale were always surgical. She took a scalpel to my argument about witness versus possession. I admired the incision. You're circling something true, she said, softer. The gaze that stays is different from the gaze that takes. On her desk, a photo of Alessia at 16 with a riot of curls and a violin too big for her chin. My pulse tripped, then behaved. That evening, a knock on my studio door. Rain in her hair, a bottle of cheap red in her hand, Alessia crossed my threshold like a decision. I need to be honest, she said, eyes set. My last relationship ended because I kept choosing safe. You aren't safe. Good, I said, before my caution could tackle me. We talked until the bottle ran out and dawn edged the blinds. We didn't undress. We laid down our histories like cards, her first crush on the orchestra conductor with forearms like thunder, mine on a girl who taught me to love poetry and then married a man named Ben, our different geographies of loss, the same longing to be seen without being swallowed. At some point she fell asleep, palm open on my stomach like a promise she didn't know she'd made. I didn't sleep. I memorized. Chapter 6, Crossed Wires. Thanksgiving arrived in a flurry of potluck dishes and the campus misfit crew converging at Professor Vale's house. I brought an ambitious cranberry compote that tasted like perseverance. Alessia arrived late, windblown, beautiful, trying to look like my professor's daughter instead of the thing that kept me awake. Across the table, talk of Grant cycles, someone's infant sneezing like a punctuation mark, jokes about the dean's email habits. Under the table, Alessia's foot finding mine, retreating, returning. I drank more wine than was wise. I escaped to the study and found the only lamp with a kind shade. Are you okay? Alessia asked from the doorway. I was not. Dance with me, she whispered, closing us into a room full of biographies. There's no music, I said. There's always music, she countered, taking my hand and placing it over her heart. We swayed, 2 beats into tenderness, when the door opened. Dr. Yoon from Medieval murmured a startled apology, borrowed the hallway, left us with the shape of our risk hanging from the ceiling like a chandelier. Neither of us laughed. We didn't dance again that night. Chapter 7, The Ask. Snow arrived in wide, forgiving flakes. In the library, buried under sources, I stared at a text from an unknown number, a photo of sheet music titled Study in September. Before the ache could become poetry, Professor Vale appeared beside my Corel. "Walk with me?" she asked. We crossed the quad. "I'm going to ask something hard," she said once the door to her office closed. "Are you and my daughter, is there something between you?" I have never been gifted at lying to women I respect. "Feelings," I said. "Yes. But no, actions that would compromise your position or mine." She watched me a while as if adjusting a lens. "When I was your age," she said, "I fell a little in love with a married professor. It made me an academic. I had to understand why Bernini carved ecstasy into stone. Passion is a study. So is discipline." She folded her hands. "After you graduate, I will not be your advisor. Then, adults will do as adults do. Until then, 5 months. Professional boundaries. No secret meetings. No proximity that relies on luck and shadows. Can you do that?" I said yes, because when a bridge offers itself you don't argue about the planks. "Tell Alessia," she said, voice threaded with something that might have been mercy. "Tell her I'm not blind. Tell her I'm trying not to be cruel." Chapter 8, The Quiet Season. January lengthened like a hallway. I wrote because not writing was untenable. Alessia and I cut ourselves down to a weekly text, proof of life, proof of intention. 1 month done, she sent on New Year's Eve. "For to go," I replied, fireworks finding my window then losing it. Yale admitted me with funding. The irony didn't bother to hide. When I told Professor Vale, she nodded once. "It's a good fit," she said. "For your work." She didn't say "and it's close to San Francisco." She didn't have to. On a Tuesday that felt like late March, the doorbell went feral. Alessia stood on my stoop wet with rain, eyes bright with grief. "A violist from my ensemble," she said. 20. Gone. A crosswalk, a driver looking at a map. "I can't, we are waiting like love is guaranteed and it isn't." I pulled her in and let her cry into my sweater until both of us were soaked. I wanted to say, "We promised." I didn't. 2 months, I said instead. "I'll tie a rope to myself and hand you the other end." She gave me a USB drive. "It's the unfinished thing. It's us, probably." I listened at 3 a.m., felt undoing and remaking do their stubborn work. Chapter 9, Defense. April brought cherry blossoms and imposter syndrome. My defense was a small, mean room with bigger people I'd admired on syllabi. I spoke about attention as tenderness and the audacity of women who painted themselves painting back. I remembered to breathe. When it ended, someone shook my hand hard. Someone else said they'd assign my chapter next spring. Professor Vale hugged me for the first time in 2 years and whispered, "Almost." I left campus and, like a person who doesn't learn, walked the long way past the practice hall. No music. A small, folded note under the strap of my satchel when I got home, final month. I bought a calendar and X'd it like a teenager. I'm 30 and I regret nothing. A. Chapter 10, Commencement. We walked in a river of polyester toward the stage while the brass band made its best case for joy. When my name was called, I crossed, shook hands, felt the paper weight of a degree and something else. Under the oldest maple, in a choreography the universe pretends is coincidence, Alessia and Professor Vale found me at the same time. "Dr. Duarte," Professor Vale said, smiling at my shock. "I'll get used to it." She looked between us. "Some boundaries have expired." Then, to Alessia, "I will not pretend this will be simple. But you are both capable of complicated grace." She left us to the shade. We stared, then laughed, the bewildered relief of people at the end of a long run who haven't realized they're still standing. "Hi," Alessia said. "Hi," I said, and it was everything. "I might have applied for a position with the New Haven Chamber," she added, eyes bright. The conductor is half tyrant, half saint. They offered me principal starting September. My brain flared and steadied. That's convenient, I said. Unless it's fate, which we're too practical to discuss. We can discuss it in the kitchen, over something too garlicky, she said. If you want. I want, I said, leaving no doubt. We kissed under the maple. No one gasped. A child clapped. Somewhere, someone's aunt took a blurry photo we'll laugh at in a decade. Chapter 11, The Long Table. Family dinners at Professor Vale's townhouse were obstacle courses disguised as meals. The first time, the table was too long, the wine too good. Alessia and I performed competent adults in the wild. Evelyn, she let me try the name in private, watched like a hawk who'd taken a mindfulness class. How's New Haven? She asked. Readable, I said. Rent is a language I'm learning. And the chamber? She asked Alessia. Less chaos than an orchestra, Alessia said. More possibility. Between bites we laid track. You take Mom to your concert, I'll invite her to my gallery talk, establish new rituals, retire old landmines. After the guests left, the three of us loaded the dishwasher. Evelyn wiped her hands on a towel and said, for the record, I know I'm not easy. I also know that what the two of you have has very little to do with me. You gave me my field, I said. Indirectly, you gave me my person. I will be obnoxiously proud of both facts, she said, and then, quiet, be patient with me. We were. Chapter 12, The Work of Ordinary Days. The year that followed was stitched out of the small, ordinary things I didn't know I craved. Alessia's case leaning by the door, my note card spread across the table we swore we'd keep tidy, Saturday mornings at the flea market where she hunted cracked metronomes and I hunted frames for art with no wall space left. There were hard things. A review of her premiere that called her music too earnest. A faculty meeting that tried to turn my syllabus into an alibi for war. A holiday with my father where he asked careful questions and then surprised me by saying, happiness is not a scandal. We learned to fight, to say, I need you to listen, not fix it, and, I need to fix it by listening. We learned to apologize without performance. We learned that you can be grateful and exhausted on the same day. Sometimes at 3 a.m., she'd wake from a dream and list the names of the girls in her youth orchestra who'd quit because some man told them ambition was a costume. I'd list painters who signed their work with brothers' names. We'd make a ledger of courage until sleep found us again. Chapter 13, Opening Night. Her symphony, finished and nothing like the USB, premiered on a windy Friday. I sat in the 7th row clutching a program that said Skyline, Op 2, 4M, and pretended I wasn't going to cry. The second movement quoted the little phrase she'd hummed against my shoulder after my defense. The third borrowed the cadences of rain on my studio window. The last ended with a chord that sounded like a door opening. When she took her bow, the hall rose, and somewhere behind me Evelyn started clapping first. After, in the green room that smelled like wilted flowers and relief, Alessia pressed her forehead to mine and whispered, we did not waste the waiting. We did not, I said, and the verbs aligned like stars. Chapter 14, The Map We Made. 2 summers later, our apartment's music room holds a piano we got for a scandalously good price and a ficus that refuses to die. My book on Baroque women painters has a publication date and a cover that made me swear out loud in a good way. The dedication is short, for A. Who taught me attention is a prayer. Evelyn comes over on Sundays with a cake she pretends she didn't buy. We argue cheerfully about an exhibition she thinks is underlit. She calls me Mira in a way that feels unforced. Sometimes she stays late and tells us about the one that got away when she was 22, and Alessia squeezes my hand under the table because some inheritances are not genetic. On the night the heat finally breaks, I'm drafting a lecture and Alessia appears in the doorway, hair in a reckless bun, smelling like cedar and something sweet. I finished it, she says, meaning the small piece that's been giving her fits. What's it called? I ask. The space between notes, she says, teasing me. I laugh. Cheap shot. Accurate shot, she counters, drawing me up from my chair. Come listen to how it holds. We stand in the music room with the window open to a city that keeps changing its mind. She plays, and the piece is exactly what it has to be: silence and sound negotiating, patience returning as a theme, the ache of almost and the relief of arrival. When she finishes, I realize we are exactly the cliché I once mistrusted: two women in a small apartment, splitting a life down the middle and finding it doubles. I don't care. Let the world keep its cynicism polished. I'll take wonder, even when it needs mending. Again? I ask. Again, she says, and the bow lifts, and the room makes room. Epilogue, coda in the key of us. 3 years after the maples flared green at commencement, our windows glow with winter light and a stubborn plant leans toward January like it knows spring personally. The music room has collected our life the way corners collect dust: a narrow piano with a chipped E, a cello stand holding 2 bows, one practical, one aspirational, stacks of scores labeled in Alessia's slanted hand, my lecture notes clipped into impossible clouds. 2 summers later, our apartment's music room holds a piano we got for a scandalously good price and a ficus that refuses to die. My book on Baroque women painters has a publication date and a cover that made me swear out loud in a good way. The dedication is short: for A. Who taught me attention is a prayer. Evelyn comes over on Sundays with a cake she pretends she didn't buy. We argue cheerfully about an exhibition she thinks is underlit. She calls me Mira in a way that feels unforced. Sometimes she stays late and tells us about the one that got away when she was 22, and Alessia squeezes my hand under the table because some inheritances are not genetic. On the night the heat finally breaks, I'm drafting a lecture and Alessia appears in the doorway, hair in a reckless bun, smelling like cedar and something sweet. I finished it, she says, meaning the small piece that's been giving her fits. What's it called? I ask. The space between notes, she says, teasing me. I laugh. Cheap shot. Accurate shot, she counters, drawing me up from my chair. Come listen to how it holds. We stand in the music room with the window open to a city that keeps changing its mind. She plays, and the piece is exactly what it has to be: silence and sound negotiating, patience returning as a theme, the ache of almost and the relief of arrival. When she finishes, I realize we are exactly the cliché I once mistrusted: two women in a small apartment, splitting a life down the middle and finding it doubles. I don't care. Let the world keep its cynicism polished. I'll take wonder, even when it needs mending. Again? I ask. Again, she says, and the bow lifts, and the room makes room. Epilogue, coda in the key of us. 3 years after the maples flared green at commencement, our windows glow with winter light and a stubborn plant leans toward January like it knows spring personally. The music room has collected our life the way corners collect dust: a narrow piano with a chipped E, a cello stand holding 2 bows, one practical, one aspirational, stacks of scores labeled in Alessia's slanted hand, my lecture notes clipped into impossible clouds. Voice 1. We became people you might not notice in a cafe, 2 women with tote bags and a shared pastry, except if you sat long enough, you'd see the glances that say entire paragraphs. The world tried its best to make us myth or mistake. We chose routine. It turns out ordinary is a miracle once you fight for it. Evelyn, only Professor Vale, in public now, comes by on Sundays with her cake that she definitely bought. The first year she kept finding reasons to bring up ethics in the Renaissance and the perils of conflating devotion and desire. We nodded, passed the whipped cream, and weighted her worry down. Somewhere between Alessia's first chamber premiere in New Haven and my book's galley proofs, she softened. The day my author copies arrived, she hugged me too long and said, "Don't mind me, I collect evidence that my students surpass me." When Alessia's Skyline won a regional award, Evelyn brought champagne and made a toast to stubbornness. She didn't look away when she said the word love. Family dinners evolved from obstacle courses into rituals. We rotate kitchens. We learned that Evelyn oversalts when she's anxious and that she will, without fail, slip folded programs into cookbooks like talismans. Once, after a concert, she told us the story of the professor she'd nearly loved at 22. She didn't romanticize it. She said, "I mistook distance for nobility. I forgive that girl now." Alessia squeezed my knee under the table. Forgiveness is a language we practice. There were the difficult things no montage mentions. A reviewer called Alessia's second symphony earnest to the point of naivete, which is critic for, "This felt too much like feeling." She read it twice, then shredded the paper and wrote all afternoon, as if refuting the sentence at the cellular level. I watched the way disappointment and discipline cohabited in her, took notes for a chapter one haven't written yet called The Courage of Unfashionable Truth. When my first seminar at Yale drew a student who wanted to talk more about my personal life than Artemisia Gentileschi, I answered his questions like a person in a courtroom and assigned 5 new readings on power. He came by office hours 2 weeks later to apologize. "I didn't realize what I was asking you to explain," he said. "Growth looks nothing like triumph. It looks like a sticky note stuck to a page that reads, 'Next time, better.'" We figured out how to disagree without setting the room on fire. Alessia needs to speak her fix before she can hear my worry. I need to be heard before I can trust her solution. The first time we got that right, it felt like tuning, the whole instrument resettled. We still mess it up when the week is loud. We still circle back. There is no prize for efficiency in love. Only practice. The day my book launched, the museum hosted a reading in a gallery of women painters who'd been stored for decades in climate-controlled obscurity. 50 chairs, wrong height, 2 microphones, 1 flaky, a florist's attempt at Baroque that looked a little like grief. People came anyway. The last question was the one that always finds me: what does it mean to look without possessing? I could have recited a paragraph. Instead I said, "It means you keep your hands open." I held them up. Alessia, in the second row, smiled the first smile I ever memorized. Her big thing came in the fall. A recording session for the space between notes, the suite that carries the bones of our waiting and the joke that turned into a title. She'd written a second movement for Evelyn, a small, fierce thing with a line that refuses to resolve until you're sure it won't. We listened to the take in a control room that smelled like cold coffee and wood. When the last chord hung where silence would catch it, Evelyn wiped her cheek and said, "I hate being wrong," and then, "I'm so glad I was." New Haven became ours the way cities do when you leave your shoe prints everywhere. Grocer who knows our argument about pears. Copy shop that lets me borrow a stapler like it's a sacred object. Coffee place where Alessia wrote 3 bars she swears saved the whole piece. On the mornings when the light hits the music room just right, I think about the girl counting weeks like beads on a rosary and want to send her a postcard. You were not foolish. You were on your way. Once, in late spring, we finally took a trip not dictated by conferences or gigs. A cheap rental on a rocky coast that smelled like salt and something older. We brought too many books and not enough food. We swam in water that scolded us for trying. At night, she composed by the kitchen window and I wrote drafts of a talk on tenderness as scholarly method. We learned a new ordinary, how the ocean makes everything you think you have to say quieter, more true. People still ask, "Did you ever regret waiting?" We answer in different keys. I say no because boundary and longing braided into a discipline I needed. She says no because delay sharpened intent. We started awake. We both say some version of, "The cost was real, the return ongoing." On our second anniversary, the one we count from the day under the maple, not the day in the elevator of recognition, she handed me a small envelope at breakfast. Inside, a photo torn from a magazine, a studio in a brick building, high windows, scuffed floors, good bones. "It's available," she said, trying to sound casual and failing. North Light. Enough wall for 10 women you're going to rescue from storage. Enough room for a piano and a plant that won't die. It could be a place where our work and other people's work meet. We went that afternoon. Dust Motes performed theater in the squares of sun. I stood in the middle of the echo and knew. We signed a lease with unseemly speed, painted one wall the deep blue of a postcard sky, and opened it 3 months later, a listening room and a microgallery. On Thursdays, she hosts quiet concerts where people sit on mismatched chairs and breathe together. On Sundays, I hang one painting by one neglected artist and we talk about what it asks of us. On the first night, Evelyn stood in the doorway, let the room wash over her, and said, "All right then. Build your church." We did not marry to make any of this safer. We did not marry to make it prove something. We made a promise in our kitchen with a handful of friends and the plant as witness. We read Neruda and a few lines we wrote ourselves. We wore practical shoes and drank dangerous champagne. We did not exchange rings because neither of us likes to wear anything we can't play or teach in. We exchanged a pencil and a rosin cake, objects our hands know by heart. When storms come, and they still do, we treat them like weather, tangible, survivable, sometimes beautiful from inside the window. We hold to the practice that carried us, attention over possession, listening over winning, patience over performance. We still get it wrong. We still come back. Tonight, the radiator clicks like it's telling a story. I've stayed too long at my desk, pretending to finish a lecture and instead finishing this. Alessia appears in the doorway in one of my old sweaters, hair pinned in a conspiracy of bobby pins. "Come hear something?" she asks. "Always," I say. In the music room, she lifts the bow and the first note finds me where I am, tired, lucky, unsure about the introduction to tomorrow's class, sure about almost nothing and absolutely sure about this. The piece isn't about us in the way strangers mean when they ask. It's about the quiet between our days and the sound we make crossing it. It's about the ordinary we fought to deserve. When she finishes, silence balances on the lip of the sound like a bird deciding. She lowers the bow. I cross the space, which is not as wide as it used to be, and kiss her once, twice, like a metronome that refuses to count anything except joy. Outside, someone laughs on the sidewalk. The plant leans toward the window. The cake tin on the counter reflects a crescent of light. We are here. We are still choosing. If there's a moral, it's not grand. It's this: attention is a prayer that, when repeated, becomes a life. Again? I ask. Again, she says. And the room makes room. The end.